This is going to be a quick little video to review the basics of ratio and proportion. So what a ratio does is it basically compares two quantities. Let's say we have a class, let's say in our class that we have 3 students that have blonde hair, and there are 12 students that have brunette, or we'll just say brown hair, okay? Well, if we want to compare these, we could say, let's say we want to compare the people with blonde to brown, we could then write a ratio 3 to 12 and write it like this. All right, so I'm sure you've seen this before. We're just reviewing the basics. Now, what we can also do with ratios is we can simplify them, and I can divide both quantities by 3, which would mean it simplifies to be the ratio 1 to 4. So what we're doing here is, if you think about it as writing 3 divided by 12 is equal to 1 over 4, well, now that we've set these two ratios equal to each other, we now have a proportion because these two quantities are equal. And when you have a proportion, what you notice is when you multiply these diagonals, 3 times 4 is 12, and when we multiply this diagonal, 12 times 1, we get 12, and those two quantities are equal. So where proportions are used most often in real life is in changing between units. Let's say, for example, how many inches are in, let's just say 3.7 feet. Okay, well, what we need to do to start is we need to first recognize our first ratio, and the ratio is going to be inches to feet. So I would maybe need to think about some previous knowledge, right? How many inches are in a foot? So what we could say is 12 inches is equal to 1 foot. This is just a known ratio that we have to use to solve this problem. So now I'm going to set up a proportion. And if I decide to put inches in the numerator and 1 foot in the denominator, then where am I going to put the 3.7 feet? Well, I'm going to put it in the denominator because the most important thing is we want the units to match in the numerator and the denominator. So if 12 inches is 1 foot, then x inches is 3.7 feet. And now we can solve for this unknown x. So the way that we solve this proportion is very similar to what I did up here when we cross-multiplied the diagonals. And so what I can do is I can start by taking 12 times 3.7 and set that equal to the diagonal of 1 times x. Okay, so get a calculator. And when I take 12 times 3.7, it's going to be 44.4 equals x, which means the answer then is 44.4 inches. And that's why I like labeling the units in my proportion right here, because then it helps me remember that I was trying to find x inches. Okay, so hopefully this is all a review. Let's take a look at a second problem that you might see on the ratio and proportion task cards. Let's suppose that we know that 3 cups of flour is used to make 2 dozen cookies. All right, I'm kind of shortening this a little bit so we don't have to write out all the sentences. So 3 cups of flour makes 2 dozen cookies. How much flour would we need? 5 dozen cookies. Okay, so we want to make more than the recipe calls with 2 dozen. So how much flour would we use for 5 dozen cookies? And the nice thing, remember, about a video is that you can always just hit the pause key, take a second, write the problem down, and then join me with how to solve it. Okay, so we're going to start with the given proportion. And the given ratio. The given ratio is right here, that 3 cups of flour makes 2 dozen cookies. So let's set this up. 3 cups of flour makes 2 dozen. And the reason that I like putting the units is because then I see that I'm going to put 5 dozen right here in the denominator, and I'm trying to find x cups. Okay, so when I cross multiply, we're going to take 3 times 5 and get 15. 2 times x is 2x, and when I divide both sides by 2, 7.5 is equal to x. And again, that's why I use this unit right here, and I label it cups, so that I know my final answer is 7.5 cups. And I've given you now 2 examples with the x in the numerator, but if the x was in the denominator, it would work out the exact same way. All right, so the last example that we're gonna do is how to solve a proportion equation that's a little bit more multi-step, okay? So let's suppose that we have solve for x. Let's suppose we have x minus 8 divided by 5 is equal to x plus 3 divided by 4. So again, we set this up by cross multiplying because we know that these two quantities are equal. And this is going to be 5 times the quantity x plus 3. And I use a parenthesis because the 5 has to be multiplied by both. So if you want to just put 5x plus 15, that's totally fine too. And then we're going to cross multiply 4 times x minus 8 in a parenthesis. So let's go ahead and distribute. 5x plus 15 equals 4x minus 32. I'm going to minus 4x from both sides and get x plus 15 equals negative 32. And then our last step here, we'll subtract 15 from both sides. And what we're going to get is x equals negative 47. All right, so there's just a couple of examples using ratio and proportions. And now what you are going to do is you're going to go back to the task cards and complete those and turn them in for credit. Okay, thanks for joining. Bye.